Commander Jack Harper stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie and watched the view screen. A blue planet called New Terra was getting bigger as they moved closer. He thought about Earth and what happened 60,000 years ago. The Kreth Empire had destroyed it. They turned the whole planet into melted rock and ash. Billions of humans died that day. But some humans escaped. They ran away into deep space and hit on worlds nobody wanted. Ice planets, moons with too much radiation, asteroids where the air was barely good enough to breathe. For 60,000 years, humans lived in the shadows. The Kreth thought they had killed all the humans. They were wrong. Lieutenant Kate Morrison sat at her station working fast on the holographic controls. She looked up at Jack and said they were getting signals from the outer colonies. The fleet was ready. Everything was going according to plan. Jack felt his jaw tighten. This plan took 3 generations to put together. 200 human settlements had to work together in secret. It was not easy. But humans were good at being patient when they needed revenge. The Kreth had become lazy over the years. Their empire now covered 40,000 star systems. They stopped looking for humans long ago. They thought humans were gone forever. That was their biggest mistake. Jack asked about the weapons. Lieutenant Ben Carter checked his screens and said everything was working. All rail cannons were ready. Plasma batteries were charged. The new shields were at full power. Jack smiled a little. Humans had built amazing technology while hiding in space. They had to survive with almost nothing, so they learned to be creative. The Kreth had stopped improving their ships and weapons. They thought they were already the strongest in the galaxy. Kate announced an incoming message from Admiral Ryan Cole on the Nightfall. The view screen changed to show an older man with gray hair. He wore the uniform of the United Human Colonies fleet. His face looked hard and serious. Ryan told Jack that all battle groups were in position. 300 ships were ready to jump. It was not a huge fleet compared to what the Kreth had, but it was 300 more ships than the Kreth expected humans to have. Jack confirmed they were ready. Ryan's face became even more serious. He said that 60,000 years ago, the Kreth took their home and killed billions of people. Today, humanity would remind them that humans never forget. All ships began their jump sequence. The target was Kreth Prime, the home world of the Empire. The bridge crew moved quickly and smoothly. Jack felt his stomach twist as the jump drive started. It always felt strange when the ship jumped through space. The stars stretched into long lines, and then they were falling through darkness. When they came out of the jump, Jack could not believe what he saw. Kreth Prime hung in space like a giant jewel. 3 huge orbital stations circled the planet. Dozens of defense platforms floated nearby. Beyond them, hundreds of Kreth warships moved in neat formations. They looked confident and unafraid. Ryan's voice came through the communication system. He told all ships that weapons were free. It was time to show the Kreth what humanity had become. The human fleet opened fire. The Kreth had expected maybe some trade ships or pirates. They never expected a military attack from a species they thought was extinct. Human railgun rounds hit the nearest defense platform before the Kreth could raise their shields. The rounds tore through the station like it was made of paper. Plasma bursts followed, bright streams of super-hot energy that cut through Kreth armor. Jack ordered his crew to target the command ship. Ben fired everything they had. The Valkyrie's forward weapons erupted in blue and white fire. On the view screen, a massive Kreth battleship shook under the impact. Its shields flashed bright and then failed. Explosions rippled across the ship's hull, and it started to tilt sideways. Kate warned that the Kreth were launching fighters. More than 200 enemy craft were coming at them fast. Jack told them to launch their own fighters. All defensive weapons should fire at will. The space around the fleet became chaos. Human fighters were sleek and fast. They moved between the larger Kreth ships like wolves hunting sheep. The human craft were built for one thing: hit-and-run attacks that found every weak spot in Kreth technology. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez was one of the Valkyrie's best pilots. She led a squadron straight into the middle of the Kreth formation. Her voice came through the communication system. She sounded tense but in control. She told her squadron to target the engine clusters and make every shot count. Jack watched as Amy's fighter did a barrel roll to dodge incoming fire. Then she fired missiles at a Kreth cruiser. The missiles hit the target perfectly, and the enemy ship's engines exploded in a bright flash. But the Kreth were starting to fight back properly. More ships were jumping into the system from other locations. The human fleet was now outnumbered 10-1. This was never supposed to be a battle they could win by force alone. Jack told Kate to send the message, all channels and all frequencies. Every Kreth in the system needed to hear it. Kate's fingers moved fast on her controls. Then Jack's voice was being broadcast across the entire Kreth Prime system. The computer translated his words into the Kreth language. Jack's message was simple and clear. He identified himself as Commander Jack Harper of the United Human Colonies. He reminded the Kreth that 60,000 years ago, they destroyed Earth and hunted humans across the stars. The Kreth believed they had killed all humans. They were wrong. Humanity survived and never forgot. This attack was just the beginning. Humans were coming for every world the Kreth had taken and every species they had enslaved. The Kreth Empire's time was over. Humanity had returned. As the message played, the human fleet started to pull back. Their jump drives were charging for a quick escape. They had done what they came to do, make the Kreth afraid. They had attacked the most protected world in the Empire and survived. Admiral Cole gave the order for all ships to jump. They would meet at a safe location far away. Colonel Dan Mitchell sat in the command center of Hades Station and read the reports. The station was buried 3 kilometers under the ice on a frozen moon. It was cold even with the heaters running at full power. But the cold was why the Kreth never found them. The attack on Kreth Prime had sent shockwaves through the Empire. For the first time in thousands of years, the Kreth knew fear. Dan smiled as he read the intelligence reports. Lieutenant Claire Hayes looked up from her station. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. She told Dan they were getting messages from the Talvek resistance. The Talvek wanted to work together with humans. Dan pulled up the message on the holographic display. The Talvek were one of many species the Kreth had conquered. They were forced to be slaves and had no freedom, but they never really gave up fighting. Dan said it was interesting. If humans worked with the resistance movements, they could multiply their forces by 20 times. The Talvek alone had rebel cells on over 300 worlds. Claire agreed. She said they should set up a meeting. But Dan said it needed to be clear that humans were not here to save the galaxy. Every species needed to save themselves. Humans would give them weapons, information, and training. The other species would give the soldiers and local knowledge. 3 days later, Dan found himself on a neutral station in the Tertius Expanse. He stood face to face with a Talvek war leader named Krell. The Talvek were big, standing almost 8 feet tall. They had 4 arms and looked like reptiles. Krell's skin had many scars from years of fighting. Krell said that humans were the ghosts who struck Kreth Prime. The Talvek thought humans were just a myth, a story the Kreth told to scare rebels. Dan said humans were very real and wanted to help drive the Kreth away from Talvek worlds. Krell's eyes got narrow. He asked why. What would humans gain from helping? Dan's answer was simple: revenge, and the knowledge that they were not fighting alone. The Kreth destroyed Earth 60,000 years ago. Humans spent all that time preparing for this moment. But humans were smart. They knew they could not defeat the Empire alone. They needed friends. Krell repeated the word friends, as if he was testing how it felt. The Talvek had fought alone for 300 years. Other species were too afraid or too broken to resist. Why would this time be different? Dan turned on a holographic projector. It showed a 3-dimensional map of Kreth space. Red dots showed major military bases. Yellow dots showed conquered worlds with rebel movements. Blue dots showed human settlements and supply points. Dan explained that now the Talvek had access to human technology, intelligence networks, and coordination. The Kreth expected individual rebellions that they could crush one at a time. They did not expect an attack from everywhere at once across the whole galaxy. If rebels hit the Kreth everywhere at the same time, the Empire could not respond to every threat. They would bleed until the Empire collapsed. Krell studied the map for a long time with his 4 arms crossed. Finally, he nodded. He said the plan was bold, and he would take it to his people. But if humans betrayed them, the Talvek would remember. They did not forgive traitors. Dan understood. He said humans did not forgive either. Meanwhile, on the human world of New Haven, people were arguing. The planet was one of the largest human settlements with nearly 2 million people. They had built quiet lives, farming and raising families. Many of them were not happy about the decision to go to war. Governor Laura Peterson stood before the Planetary Council. She faced angry questions from representatives who believed the attack on Kreth Prime had put everyone in danger. Councilman Greg Adams stood up and shouted. His face was red with anger. He said that Laura had painted a target on every human world in the galaxy. His children were safe before. Now the Kreth knew exactly where to find them. Laura shot back in a calm but firm voice. She said his children were never safe. The Kreth did not forgive and did not forget. Sooner or later, they would have found humans. At least now humans were fighting back on their own terms. Councilwoman Beth Warner stood up. Her voice shook with emotion. She said her husband was a pilot who died in the Kreth Prime attack. How many more people had to die for this revenge plan? Laura's expression softened. She said she was truly sorry for Beth's loss. But this was not about revenge. It was about survival. The Kreth Empire was built on conquest and slavery. If humans did not fight, they were just waiting for the day the Kreth found them and finished what they started 60,000 years ago. Another voice called out. It was Kevin Shaw, an old man who had lost his whole family in a Kreth raid 40 years ago. He said Laura was right. He had seen what the Kreth did to those they considered inferior. The Kreth did not negotiate. They did not show mercy. The only choice was to fight or die. The council chamber filled with arguments and raised voices. Laura let them argue because it was important. This was a debate that needed to happen. Not everyone would agree, but democracy had to continue even during a war. Back on Hades Station, Dan got word that the Talvek had agreed to the alliance. Even better, 3 other species had reached out through Talvek contacts. The Shrell, the Vorn, and the Kelton all wanted to join. They had all suffered under Kreth rule, and all wanted revenge. Claire said they were building something bigger than just humans versus Kreth. This could be the foundation of a new galactic order. Dan warned her to take it one step at a time. First, they had to survive. The Kreth were going to come at them with everything. They needed to be ready. As if his words made it happen, alarms started blaring throughout the station. Red emergency lights turned everything crimson. The watch officer reported that multiple Kreth ships just jumped into the system. It was a full battle group with 20 capital ships and escorts. They were heading straight for Hades Station. The Kreth battle group moved toward Hades Station like a hammer coming down. On the flagship Decimator, War Leader Thrak studied the ice moon with cold satisfaction. The humans had been clever to hide their base under kilometers of frozen water, but Kreth sensors had improved over 60,000 years. Thrak ordered his ships to start the attack. He wanted that moon cracked open and every human inside turned to ash. But as the Kreth ships moved into position to fire, space itself seemed to tear apart. 7 human warships appeared from jump points that should have been impossible. They jumped from inside the gravity well of the moon itself. The Valkyrie led the attack, followed by the Nightfall and 5 heavy cruisers. They had been waiting in dark space for exactly this moment. Admiral Cole's voice came through the communication system from the Nightfall. He told all ships to focus fire on the command vessel. If they took out the leadership, the rest would run away. The human ships fired at close range. The Decimator's shields held but barely. Thrak was thrown from his command chair as the ship shook hard. He roared at his crew to return fire and target the lead human vessel. But the humans were not fighting like the species the Kreth remembered. They moved together with perfect coordination. Each ship covered the weaknesses of the others. When the Kreth tried to target the Valkyrie, the cruiser Horizon moved in front and its shields took the damage. When the Kreth tried to flank them, the human ships scattered and came back together in a new formation. On Hades Station, Dan watched the battle with grim determination. The human fleet was buying them time, but not much. The station's evacuation was already happening. Thousands of people were moving toward transport ships in the main hangar. Claire reported that they had civilian families in Sector 7 who would not make it to the transports in time. Dan ordered them sent to the emergency shelters. They would seal those sectors and turn on decoy beacons. If they could not get everyone out, they would make the Kreth think they did. In space, the battle had become brutal. The Kreth had more ships, but the humans had better technology and desperation. When a Kreth destroyer moved to catch the fleeing transports, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez led her fighter squadron in a dangerous attack. Their combined weapons punched through the destroyer's engines and sent it spinning out of control. Jack's voice came through her communication system, telling her to break off. She had done enough. Amy said no. There were families on those transports. Children. She was not letting them die. Her squadron followed her and attacked the Kreth ships like angry insects. They were too small to be easily hit, but deadly when they struck. One by one, Amy's pilots found their targets: sensor arrays, weapon systems, engine pods. Each hit made the Kreth battle group weaker, but the cost was high. Amy watched as 3 of her pilots took direct hits. Their fighters exploded in bright flashes. She made herself focus and push down the grief. There would be time to mourn later if she survived. On the Nightfall, Admiral Cole made a decision he knew would haunt him forever. He ordered all ships to prepare to jump. They were pulling back. His tactical officer protested. There were still transports launching from the station. Cole said quietly that he knew. But if they stayed, the Kreth would destroy the entire fleet. They had bought the station all the time they could. Either the remaining people made it out now, or they did not. The human warships started to pull away. Their jump drives were charging. The Kreth sensed victory and pressed their attack harder. But by the time they moved to stop the humans, the fleet was already gone. They vanished into the void. On Hades Station, Dan stood in the command center as the last transport launched. Around him, skeleton crew members worked to arm the station's self-destruct system. Claire told him he needed to go. The last shuttle was waiting. Dan promised he would. But first he needed to make sure the data purge was complete. They could not let the Kreth access their network. If the Kreth got that information, they would find every human settlement in this part of space. The station shook as Kreth weapons started hitting it. Massive beams of energy carved through the ice and into the outer levels of the facility. Dan's fingers moved fast on the console as he wiped databases and destroyed communication logs. He announced the purge was complete. Now they could run. They ran through corridors that were starting to buckle. Emergency doors slammed shut behind them. The shuttle's engines were already running when they arrived. The pilot did not wait for the loading ramp to fully close before launching. Behind them, Hades Station exploded in a series of massive blasts as the self-destruct reached critical levels. The explosion was powerful enough to crack the moon itself. Giant chunks of ice spun away into space. Claire asked if everyone made it out as they jumped away. Dan pulled up the casualty reports on his data pad. His face was grim. 73 people were dead, mostly people in Sector 7 who could not reach the shelters in time, and 12 pilots from the fighter squadrons. Claire asked about Amy Rodriguez. Dan scrolled through the list and then shook his head. She made it. Barely. Her fighter took damage, but she got back to the horizon before the jump. As the human survivors scattered to pre-arranged meeting points, the galaxy was changing. News of the battle spread through underground networks. The Kreth had found a human base and attacked it with overwhelming force, yet most of the humans escaped. More importantly, they had damaged the Kreth battle group badly, destroying 5 ships and damaging 8 others. On the conquered world of Talvek Prime, Krell got the news and began organizing his resistance cells. If humans could stand against the Kreth, maybe other species could too. 3 months after Hades Station fell, the galaxy was burning. On the industrial world of Keth 7, a Kreth weapons factory exploded in a fireball visible from space. Talvek rebels had disguised themselves as slave workers and planted human-made explosives in key locations. Then they disappeared into underground tunnels before anyone knew what happened. On the trade hub of Nexus Point, Shrell hackers working with human computer specialists crashed the entire station's network. They stole years of Kreth shipping data and military information. By the time the Kreth figured out what happened, the raiders were gone, and half their supply chain was exposed. On the farming colony of Verdant, the Vorn resistance rose up in open rebellion. They had weapons that humans smuggled in over several months. The Kreth soldiers on the planet were overrun in hours. For the first time in 300 years, the Vorn flag flew over their own world. The Kreth Empire was being attacked from 1,000 different directions at once. They could not respond to everything. On the human carrier Defiance, Commander Jack Harper worked with representatives from 6 different species. They were planning the next wave of attacks. The ship's briefing room had become a symbol of the new alliance. Humans, Talvek, Shrell, Vorn, Kelton, and others sat together, united by a common enemy. Krell said the Kreth were pulling ships from the outer regions to protect their core worlds. This left their frontier bases weak and vulnerable. Jack agreed. That was where they needed to hit them. They would take out sensor networks, communication relays, and supply depots. They did not have the firepower to win big battles, so they would make sure those battles never happened. They would make the Kreth chase shadows while their empire fell apart. Shrell was the Shrell tactical coordinator. Her species was naturally good at mathematics, which made them brilliant strategists. She said her people had identified 12 critical choke points in the Kreth supply network. If they disrupted these points at the same time, they would cut off 3 entire sectors from reinforcements. Jack nodded with approval. He told them to make it happen, but he reminded everyone that this only worked if they stayed coordinated. The moment they started working independently, the Kreth would pick them off one by one. On New Haven, the debate about the war had finally ended. It was replaced by grim acceptance and determination. The planet had changed from a peaceful farming community into a military supply hub. Factories were making weapons, ships, and supplies for the Allied forces. Governor Laura walked through one of the new assembly plants. She watched workers putting together fighter craft on a production line that would have been impossible just months ago. Humans had been forced to be efficient and make do with less. That cultural memory was now paying off. Where the Kreth built massive warships that used huge amounts of resources, humans built thousands of smaller, more flexible craft. Councilman Greg Adams approached her. His earlier anger was gone, replaced by tired acceptance. He had lost a daughter in a Kreth raid 2 weeks ago when they discovered a small human outpost on an asteroid. Now he wore the same haunted look as everyone else. He told Laura they had a situation. Refugees, thousands of them. Vorn, Talvek, Kelton, species fleeing Kreth revenge attacks for the rebellions. They were asking for safety on New Haven. Laura did not hesitate. She said to grant it. They had the space, and they needed to show the galaxy that the Alliance was not just about fighting the Kreth. It was about building something better, but not every human agreed. On the mining station of Beltran 3, a group of colonists led by a man named Chris Decker had different ideas. They survived 60,000 years by staying hidden. They blamed the military attacks for putting them in danger. Chris argued at a heated town meeting that they should surrender. Tell the Kreth they had nothing to do with the attacks. Maybe the Kreth would leave them alone. Megan Torres was the station's chief engineer. She said the Kreth would kill them. The Kreth did not accept surrender from humans. Humans were vermin to them. You did not negotiate with vermin. You killed them. Chris insisted they should run. Take the ships and disappear deeper into dark space. Find somewhere the Kreth would never look. Megan said quietly that there was nowhere left. Not anymore. The Kreth were hunting every trace of humanity. Their only chance was to win this war. The meeting ended without agreement. That night, Chris and 37 others stole 3 ships and fled into deep space. They hoped to find safety beyond the conflict. Most of the galaxy would never know what happened to them. Those 3 ships were never heard from again. Back in Kreth space, Emperor Vrek was discovering that terror tactics worked both ways. His extermination fleets had found and attacked several human outposts, but the cost was huge. Human ships fought with fury that seemed almost suicidal. They often rammed Kreth vessels when their weapons ran out, and every attack on a human settlement resulted in coordinated revenge strikes on Kreth worlds that killed thousands. War leader Thrak reported during a private meeting with the Emperor. He said the humans were making it too expensive. Every world they destroyed cost them a battle group. Every supply convoy needed a full military escort. The economy was straining under the military costs. Vrek snarled that they would spend what they must. He would not be the Emperor who lost to humans. Thrak said carefully that it was not just humans anymore. The Talvek, the Shrell, the Vorn. They all saw what the humans accomplished. Rebellions were spreading. They were fighting on 3,000 different fronts at the same time. Vrek rose from his throne. His massive form towered over the war leader. He said they would crush them on 3,000 fronts. He ordered a message sent to all governors. Any world that protected rebels would face mass executions. 10,000 citizens for every Kreth soldier killed. Let them see the price of resistance. But Thrak knew such brutality would only make things worse. The Kreth Empire ruled through fear for so long, they forgot fear could cut both ways. The more brutally they responded, the more species joined the rebellion. At least dying while fighting was better than dying as a slave. In a secret facility on the human world of New Terra, a different kind of revolution was happening. Dr. Sam Ellis was one of humanity's top scientists. He stood before a machine that could change the war completely. He told Admiral Cole and the military leaders that they were calling it the Cascade Drive. It was based on principles they discovered while making jump technology, but taken much further. Instead of jumping from one point to another, it created a cascade effect. It pulled a ship through multiple jump points very quickly. Admiral Cole asked how that helped them. Sam smiled and said it was unpredictable. Even they did not know exactly where a ship using Cascade Drive would appear. More importantly, neither did the Kreth. The entire Kreth defensive strategy was based on controlling known jump points. With this, humans could appear anywhere at any time without warning. Jack asked how long until they could use this on their ships. Sam said 3 months for a full upgrade of the fleet, but he could have a test squadron ready in 2 weeks. Cole ordered him to do it. If this worked, it could be the advantage they needed. 2 years into the war, the galaxy had changed completely. The Kreth Empire once controlled 40,000 star systems. Now it was breaking apart. Entire sectors had declared independence. Species that were enslaved for thousands of years were now building their own governments and their own futures. The Kreth still held their core territories, but their grip was getting weaker every day, and humanity had become the force holding the rebellion together. Commander Jack Harper was now Admiral Harper after Cole retired. He stood on the bridge of a new flagship called the Restoration. It was a massive carrier built to coordinate operations between multiple species. Around him, the bridge crew represented a dozen different worlds. Talvec navigators, Shrell sensor operators, human tactical officers, and Vorn engineers all worked together. Lieutenant Nina Park reported that they were getting a priority message from the Kelton Council. They were ready to commit their fleet to the assault on Kreth Prime. Jack nodded seriously. Kreth Prime. 2 years ago, they struck at the Kreth homeworld and barely escaped. Now they were going back, but this time they were not running. He asked how many ships they had. Nina said 783 capital ships, 3,000 support vessels, and over 10,000 fighters. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in recorded galactic history. Jack let that information sink in. Less than 60 years ago, humanity had been scattered refugees hiding in the dark. Now they were leading a galactic army. He asked about the enemy strength. Lieutenant Luke Anders from Tactical reported approximately 1,000 capital ships defending the Kreth Prime system. But their intelligence suggested maybe half of those were actually combat-ready. The Kreth had been pulling crews from everywhere to maintain their frontline forces. The plan was bold, maybe even crazy. The Allied fleet would jump into the Kreth Prime system and fight the enemy directly. While the space battle happened, Special Forces teams would go down to the planet itself and target the Emperor's palace. If they could kill the Kreth leadership, the Empire would collapse completely. Leading one of those Special Forces teams was Colonel Dan Mitchell. He had spent the last 2 years training for exactly this moment. His team was made up of the best humanity had, along with elite soldiers from every Allied species. Dan briefed his team on the stealth transport Shadowfall. He reminded them of the mission parameters. They were not trying to hold ground. They would drop, find the Emperor, and kill him. Then they would escape before the Kreth military could respond. Clean, quick, professional. Sergeant Matt Freeman was a veteran of dozens of raids behind Kreth lines. He asked what happened if they could not escape. Dan's answer was simple. They would complete the mission anyway. The Emperor died no matter what. On New Haven, Governor Laura watched the fleet's departure from her office. She felt the weight of history on her shoulders. 2 years ago, she stood before the Planetary Council and argued for war. Now she was watching friends, colleagues, and strangers fly off to what might be the final battle. Her aide announced there was someone to see her. An old woman entered. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were bright and sharp. Dr. Hannah Wells had been one of the original survivors of Earth's destruction. Advanced medicine and suspended animation kept her alive. At 150 years old, she was one of the last living links to humanity's home world. Hannah said she wanted to thank Laura for having the courage to fight, for not letting them hide forever. Laura replied bitterly that some people said she had killed them all, that if they stayed hidden, they would be safe. Hannah said that safety was not living, it was just existing. Laura had given humanity something they lost when Earth died. Purpose. They were not just surviving anymore. They were building a future. At the same moment, the Allied fleet was dropping out of jump space around Kreth Prime. The Kreth knew this attack was coming. It was impossible to hide the movement of such a massive fleet, but knowing and being prepared were different things. Jack broadcast to the entire fleet. He said that today they would end the Kreth Empire. Not for revenge, though they earned that right. Not for glory, though history would remember this day. They fought so that no species would ever again have to hide in the dark, wondering if today was the day the monsters found them. They fought for freedom. All weapons should open fire. The space around Kreth Prime erupted in the largest battle the galaxy had ever seen. Thousands of ships engaged in chaos and fury. Kreth vessels, massive and powerful, traded blows with the more numerous but smaller Allied ships. Fighters swarmed like schools of fish, moving between capital ships and seeking weaknesses. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez now commanded her own squadron on the carrier Valkyrie. She led her pilots into the teeth of the Kreth defenses. She told her squadron to remember their training. They were faster and smarter. They were fighting for something the Kreth would never understand. Make every shot count. Her fighters moved through a storm of fire. Their advanced targeting systems picked out weak points in Kreth shields. When a Kreth cruiser moved to attack a damaged Allied ship, Amy's squadron was there. Their missiles punched through the enemy's shields and disabled its weapons. But the Kreth were far from defeated. Their ships might have been crewed by less experienced soldiers, but they still had superior firepower. When a Kreth battleship fired its full weapons at the Talvek flagship Unity, the ship's shields collapsed and explosions rippled across its hull. Nina reported that Unity was going down. Krell was evacuating the bridge. Jack's jaw tightened. He ordered all nearby ships to protect the escape pods, and someone needed to kill that battleship. 3 human cruisers led by the Horizon moved to attack. Captain Ryan Mitchell, Dan's younger brother, commanded the Horizon with the same aggressive tactics that made Dan famous. The cruisers came in fast and low, using destroyed ship wreckage as cover. Then they appeared at very close range. Ryan commanded all forward weapons to fire at will. The Horizon's guns spoke, followed by its sister ships. The concentrated fire overwhelmed the battleship's shields. Within seconds, the massive ship was breaking apart. On the surface of Kreth Prime, Dan's team was racing through the Emperor's palace. They fought past increasingly desperate guards. The Kreth never believed their homeworld could be invaded. Their planetary defenses were designed to fight ships, not ground forces. Claire scanned with advanced sensors and reported the target was in the throne room 2 levels down. Heavy guard presence. Dan ordered breach and clear tactics. Matt should use the plasma charges on the doors. The doors exploded inward and Dan's team stormed the throne room. Emperor Vrek stood waiting, surrounded by his personal guard. Massive Kreth warriors bred specifically for combat. Vrek hissed that humans dared to violate the sacred throne of the Kreth Empire. His translator made the word humans sound like an insult. Dan raised his weapon and said they dared a lot more than that. The throne room erupted in violence. The Kreth guards were powerful. Each one could tear a human apart with bare hands. But Dan's team had trained for this. They moved as one, supporting each other and exploiting every weakness. Plasma bolts and energy beams lit up the ancient chamber. When it was over, the guards lay dead, and Emperor Vrek stood alone, wounded but defiant. Vrek snarled that they had won nothing. Kill him, and another would take his place. The Kreth Empire would survive. Dan said quietly that it would not. The Empire was built on fear and slavery. The Kreth made it impossible for anyone to feel safe unless they were destroyed. They taught everyone that the only way to be free was to burn the Empire to the ground. So that was what they did. He fired once, and the Emperor fell. In orbit, the battle was reaching its end. The Kreth fleet, already stretched thin by years of fighting, was breaking. Ships were fleeing, jumping away to whatever safe places they could find. The Allied fleet pressed their advantage, but Jack gave the order to let them go. Luke urged that they could pursue and finish them. Jack said no. Let them run. Let them spread the word that the Kreth Empire had fallen. Let every conquered world know that resistance was possible and tyrants could be defeated. As the battle ended, Dan and his team made their escape. They fought their way back to the Shadowfall. Claire took a plasma bolt to the shoulder, and Matt lost his left hand to a Kreth blade, but they all made it out. When the Shadowfall docked with the Restoration, Admiral Harper was waiting. Dan reported simply that it was done. The Emperor was dead. Jack nodded slowly. The war was over. Now came the hard part. Dan raised an eyebrow and asked what was harder than war. Jack replied that peace was harder. Building something that lasted and was worth all the lives they spent to get here. That was harder than anything they faced. In the weeks that followed, the Kreth Empire dissolved. Some Kreth worlds surrendered and accepted occupation by Allied forces. Others descended into civil war as different groups fought for control. A few tried to maintain the old ways of enslaving local populations, but coalition forces quickly put them down. Humanity took no territory for themselves. Instead, they helped each liberated species establish their own governments and their own futures. It was a complete contrast to the Kreth approach, and it won humanity more friends than 1,000 battle victories could have. On the anniversary of the first attack on Kreth Prime, a ceremony was held on New Terra. Representatives from 73 species gathered to sign the Galactic Charter. The document established principles of self-determination, mutual cooperation, and collective defense. Admiral Jack Harper, now Ambassador Harper, stood at the podium and spoke to the assembled crowd. He said that 60,000 years ago, humanity lost everything. Their home world was destroyed, their population killed, their future uncertain. They could have given up. They could have accepted extinction. Instead, they chose to remember. They chose to survive. They chose to hope. But they did not survive alone. The Talvek taught them strategy. The Shrell taught them precision. The Vorn taught them resilience. Every species here contributed to this victory, and every species deserved credit for the future they were building. The Kreth Empire believed that might made right, that the strong could dominate the weak without consequence. Today they proved them wrong. Today they declared that the age of empires was over. The age of cooperation had begun. The crowd erupted in applause, not just humans but beings from across the galaxy, united by shared struggle and shared hope. Later, Jack stood alone on an observation deck looking out at the stars. Kate found him there as she always did during his quiet moments. She asked what he was thinking about. Jack said, Earth, wondering if they would ever be able to go back and see if anything survived. Kate suggested they could send a mission to find out. Jack shook his head. Not yet. Earth was their past, but also their scar. Maybe in another 1,000 years when they built something truly lasting, they could return. But right now they needed to focus on the future. Kate asked with a smile what was next for the great Admiral Harper. Jack said firmly that retirement was next. He spent 2 years fighting. He would like to spend the rest of his life building, maybe teach at the new academy. Pass on what they learned to the next generation. Kate predicted he would be bored within a month. Jack agreed that was probably true, but he would be bored in peace, and that was worth more than she knew. As they stood together watching the stars, neither of them noticed the young human girl who had been watching Jack's speech. Her name was Beth Carter. She was born during the war on a refugee transport fleeing a Kreth attack. She never knew peace, only struggle and survival. But she listened to Ambassador Harper's words and saw the galaxy her parents' generation built, and she decided that someday she would join the fleet. She would protect this new peace because she knew how much it cost to achieve. 60,000 years ago, the Kreth Empire destroyed Earth, believing they had killed all humans. They were wrong. Humanity survived, adapted, and grew. They turned grief into strength, rage into determination, and fear into hope. They not only reclaimed their place among the stars, they transformed the galaxy itself. The age of the Kreth was over. The age of humanity and of all free species had just begun. As the meeting ended, Jack found himself alone with Kate Morrison on an observation deck. They looked down at New Terra's capital city. The planet had grown enormously in recent months. Its population swelled with refugees and military people. Kate asked quietly if he thought they could win. Jack was silent for a long moment. He said he thought they could survive. And sometimes that was the same thing. They lasted 60,000 years against impossible odds. The Kreth forgot what that kind of stubbornness looked like. Kate said softly that her grandmother used to tell her stories about Earth. about blue skies and green forests, about a world that was not trying to kill you every second. She used to think they were fairy tales. Jack said maybe they would see it again someday, maybe not in their lifetime, but someday. Humans were good at waiting for the right moment. Far below in the city's central square, workers were building a monument. It would have the names of every human who died since the war began. The list grew longer every day. But around the monument, children played. Vendors sold food. People laughed. Life continued as it always had, as it always would. Because that was humanity's real strength. The ability to find joy even in the darkest times. To build even while everything was falling apart. To hope even when hope seemed foolish. The Kreth had destroyed Earth, but they had not destroyed that. And 60,000 years later, that spark of defiance was burning brighter than ever. On New Haven, Governor Laura called an emergency meeting of the Planetary Council. The attack on Hades Station proved her point. Nowhere was truly safe. The debate about whether to fight was over. Now the question was how to fight. Deep in Kreth space on the capital world, Emperor Vrek listened to war leader Thrak's report with growing fury. The Emperor said that 60,000 years had passed, and these pests still caused problems. No more half measures. He wanted every world where humans hid found and destroyed. He ordered the extermination fleets deployed. Humanity would learn what it meant to defy the Kreth Empire. But the Emperor did not know that his empire's greatest weakness was not military. It was the foundation it was built on. For 60,000 years, the Kreth ruled through fear and overwhelming force. They crushed rebellions and conquered species and kept order through brutal efficiency, but they never faced a coordinated resistance. They never had to fight an enemy that understood their tactics, studied their weaknesses, and was willing to pay any price for victory. Most importantly, they never faced an enemy with nothing left to lose. The hunt was on, but the question remained. Who was the hunter and who was the prey? Dan felt his blood go cold. Somehow, the Kreth had found them. He ordered all personnel to battle stations and told them to activate all defensive systems. Someone needed to contact Admiral Cole. They were going to need help fast. As the station's crew rushed to prepare, Dan stared at the tactical display showing the approaching Kreth fleet. The real war was about to begin. The hidden places where humans had been safe for so long were not safe anymore. The Kreth were coming, and they were angry. Dan knew that the next few hours would determine if humanity's plan would work, or if they had just signed their own death sentence by revealing themselves. He touched the communication panel and spoke to the whole station. His voice was steady and calm. He told everyone that they had trained for this. They knew what to do. Humans had survived 60,000 years by being tough and smart. Today they would prove they could still fight. The station's crew moved to their positions, weapons charged, shields powered up. And in the cold darkness of space, the Kreth battle group drew closer, ready to crush the humans they found. The Kreth were trying to chase them now, but the human ships were already disappearing one by one. They jumped back into the safety of dark space. The Valkyrie was one of the last ships to leave. As they prepared to jump, Jack took one last look at Kreth Prime. He knew the war had just begun. The Kreth would come looking for humans now with everything they had. But that was fine. Humans had been preparing for this for 60,000 years. They knew how to hide. They knew how to fight. And most importantly, they knew they had nothing left to lose. The Valkyrie jumped away into darkness. Behind them, Kreth Prime burned with the fires of destroyed ships and stations. The empire that thought itself untouchable had just been touched. The message was sent and received. Humanity was back, and they were not running anymore.